to get those two different messages in close proximity, the question that was raised in the minds of not only myself, but a lot of other people, who's in charge in the Soviet Union? And that's when things really get dangerous. If there is some uncertainty about who's in command and who's giving the orders on the other side, that's when you know you're really in danger.
The danger is becoming very real, and for one man, it will be fatal. Ever since the Soviet missiles were first discovered, the U.S. Air Force has been flying periodic spy missions over Cuba. So far, the Soviets have hesitated to fire. 9 a.m. Major Rudolph Anderson takes off from McCoy Air Force Base in Orlando, Florida, for his overflight of Cuba. At 10 a.m. local time, he guides his U-2 over the Cuban port of Baines. Against standing orders from Moscow, the Soviet commander on the ground decides to fire. The missile streaks 75,000 feet into the sky and bursts next to Anderson's aircraft, killing him and sending the U-2 spinning down to Earth. The Cuban Missile Crisis now has its first combat fatality. Word of the shoot-down doesn't reach the president until a 4 p.m. meeting with ExCom.
U-2 was shot down. Low altitude, so it was shot down. Yeah, Roger said it was not shot down. Pilot killed? Well, this is much an escalation by them, isn't it?
A U.S. pilot has been killed, and the military want a response. Airstrikes preceding the invasion of Cuba are set to start tomorrow, unless Kennedy and Khrushchev can find a way out. In Washington, the president decides to send Bobby Kennedy to meet with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin and make an offer. The Soviets would dismantle and immediately remove their missiles from Cuba. The U.S. would end the quarantine and promise not to invade Cuba. But the Kennedys secretly offer one more, very substantial incentive. The U.S. would also remove NATO Jupiter missiles from Turkey. But only if that concession were kept utterly secret by the Soviets. Kennedy gives the Soviets 24 hours to respond. With U.S. attacks on Cuba just hours away, the nuclear battlefield is as close as it has ever been. For those in the know, both in Washington and Moscow, fear has reached a fever pitch.
I told my wife, I will not go to work today. I don't know what will be tomorrow. It's quite possible that tomorrow we will not be alive. Let's go to the cinema to see a new film.
The Secret Service wanted to take the president to the underground. Well, I had been to the underground and I was cleared for it. That night was one of the most miserable that I've ever spent because I kept thinking of what could happen and, that I would be in a safe place and my family would be incinerated because I was convinced that Washington would be a target.
The whole of mankind was on the brink, on the verge of a nuclear abyss. We were 2 hours away from the end. 2 hours.
October 28th, 3 a.m. Moscow. The Soviets have an announcement to make, a personal message from Khrushchev to President Kennedy. This time, they use Radio Moscow rather than a Western Union telegram. Khrushchev announces that the missile sites will be dismantled and returned to the Soviet Union. Is the crisis finally over? President Kennedy puts off military action for one day while he waits for that day's reconnaissance photography to be examined.
The planes are out, and when we look at the photography, now they're pulling back. You could see that they'd pulled the missiles back, they had pulled the launchers out. It was obvious now that they had gotten the word.
Over the following months, 60 ballistic missiles and 134 nuclear warheads are dismantled and shipped back to the Soviet Union. Although serious tensions remain, one of the most perilous chapters of the 20th century is over.